First of all, welcome everyone this morning. Thank you for being here. I'm going to start by asking everybody a question, which is how many of you handle photography for your business in any way? Good, a whole bunch of you. So here's the next question I'm going to ask is, do you guys use something that looks like this? A couple of you do. How many of you use something that looks like this? Exactly. So here's the thing, as I'm going to talk today about a whole host of tips that you can incorporate into the photography that you do for your business, and it's not going to matter whether you're using something like this or something like this. All of the principles are going to remain the same. And I think at the end of this, hopefully, you'll be able to kind of step up that photography game a little bit, because one of the things that customers, in my experience, both as a creative director over at the AMA for doing freelance work and as a customer myself, one of the things that I do when I'm looking at going to a business or to be a client for a company, et cetera, is I'm going to their social media and I'm looking at the photos that they have on there. I'm looking at, where's their business located? If the photos don't look very good, that kind of gives me an indication about what I might think of that company. Whether rightly or wrongly, it is that first impression. And that first impression is crucially important. I'll start by telling you a little bit about me. I promise I'll keep this very short. So I've been a photographer and a video producer here in East Central Indiana for 20 years now, which feels like an incredibly long time. I've done work with doing TV commercials in Indianapolis, Anderson, Richmond, Kokomo, Muncie. I've worked with marketing agencies here in town. I've worked with Intersection quite a bit. I've worked with Paper Dingo Creative here in town as well. I've done some work with the now Destination Muncie, for the Delaware County Community Foundation, all sorts of folks. And I take all sorts of genres of photos. I have shot the Indianapolis 500 for the last 12 years. I'm the team photographer for our local roller derby team, the Corn-Fed Roller Derby. I do concert photography. Of course, when I'm at the AMA, I do a lot of photography for us. That photo in particular was for the cover of one of our magazines. That is a model airplane that we took out onto the runway and, got a little creative with how we wanted that to look. And of course, I shoot all sorts of stuff around town in Muncie. You'll likely, if you haven't, will see me at events all over town, downtown, etc., you name it. So that's my background. I'll try to keep that nice and short for you guys because I want to get into these tips. And you're going to hear me say a lot today. This is the most important thing you can do. Sometimes I exaggerate. This first tip, I promise you, is the most important thing you can do. Clean off your lens. If you've ever seen a picture that you've taken with your phone where it's very hazy, the lights are kind of blown out and just looks kind of dingy, there's a really good reason why that probably is the case, and it's probably because you've got a fingerprint on that lens. This sounds so silly, but it's the reason I wanted to start with it, is because it's so crucially important. And I tried to actually take an example. So I took some example photos for a lot of my tips today, and it's going to feature this wonderful 1972 Yashica twin lens reflex camera. It is my pride and joy. I love this camera so much. I actually found, full disclosure, I had a hard time replicating this problem with modern cameras. I didn't know that this had been a little bit rectified, maybe not rectified, but because I'm so used to when I pull my camera out, I just wipe it off with my shirt like this before I take the photo because it improves it so dramatically. What I found out when I was taking this a couple weeks ago is that it's harder to tell these days. Your mileage may vary. But if you look up in some of these areas where these lights are kind of they look like they're glowing. This shot was before I cleaned the lens off. That shot is after I've cleaned the lens off. You're gonna see a little bit of an improvement there. Again, I had a hard time replicating this, so your mileage may vary on this, but it is one of the most important. It should be the first thing you do. You pull that phone out before you take a photo. Just make sure that it's wiped off. Make sure that it's clean and it doesn't have any fingerprints on it. Okay. Got that one out of the way. I wanted to get that kind of in and out quickly because it was so simple and we don't have to talk about it anymore. Tip number 2 has to do with light sources. So when you guys are doing your photography for your business, how many of you are thinking about where the light's coming from, anything related to lighting? I'm thrilled that so many of you are, because it's crucially important. Photography is all about light. It's about how much light is hitting the sensor of your camera. It used to be film, now it's a digital sensor. The thing is there are different types of light sources, and there are some things you can do without spending a dime to improve what your lights are doing, okay? Those of you that are thinking about light, have you bought lights on Amazon or bought external lights that you can pull in to try to make things a little bit brighter? Some of you have, some of you haven't. So your number one light source you should start using are windows. It doesn't cost you a dime, and it's the best light source you can get. The bigger the light source, the softer your light's gonna be, the more pleasing the photo is probably gonna look from a lighting perspective. Whenever I need to take a product shot and I'm a place where I don't have any external lights with me, I find the biggest window I can find. And I say, okay, today doesn't help us much because the sun's not shining, but on a bright sunny day, that is the biggest light source you can find. If you ever watch behind the scenes videos from Hollywood movies, you'll notice they've got these, probably as large as this window, big white sheets that are in front of their lights. That's to soften that light and to make that light source as big as they can make it. And that's to drop the amount of shadow down in the image. You can also use lamps. Those can be very helpful because they're around. Again, you're not having to spend extra money and that sort of thing. Let's take a look at some examples. So this is a photo that was taken with, I'm going to say no light sources. There was a window off to this side that's backlighting it. This is something that I would typically see from folks who may not have a whole lot of experience taking photos of products and whatnot. But there's no light coming from the right side. And the problem with that is, well, my subject is facing that way, right? So imagine this is a person, and this is their face. Their face is going to be darker than what's behind, than their back or their side. So what can we do? Well, let's try to find a window. So I found, again, huge windows that I happen to have at my office. And okay, well, let's face our subject toward that window, right? Here's what the difference looks like. There's no extra lighting used in this. There's no post-processing done on this. This is straight out of the camera. And this was taken with a cell phone, by the way. All these that I'm going to show you that I took as examples were all shot on a cell phone. That's the difference between having a big, soft source for light versus not having any light at all, or even worse, being backlit. You'll see the shadows are almost completely gone. You're seeing it's evenly lit on all sides, and it just looks like a little bit more professional level photo. If you have a light, if you have bought lights off of Amazon, something like this, or even something, as small as this. I mean, something like this costs about $30, $35 on Amazon. Better than nothing, but it's all about how you use it. The difference that you're going to find, if I go the right direction. So this is what that would look like, okay? Now we've improved getting more light on the front of our subject. We're casting some shadow back here. That's not the end of the world. I'm probably going to knock that laptop over before this is all said and done. having some shadows, not the end of the world. It's all about, how does it look? If you look at it and you're like, yeah, that's a little bit too much, you can find ways to get rid of that by moving that light closer. Again, it's all about how big that light source is to your subject. If you look back at that, kind of my behind the scenes shot here, that light's pretty far back. If we moved it in closer and tighter, some of that shadow might go away. That's one of the problems with these types of lights, is that because they're so small, you're not going to be able to get it close enough to really get it soft enough to replicate what a window might do. That's why I kind of harp on the fact that window light, it's free, it's available, and it's going to give you the most pleasing light you can get for your photos. Tip number 3, composition. How many of you have heard someone talk about composition when it comes to photography and even art in general? Yeah, a few of you have. So what is composition? It's essentially how your elements in your photo are arranged. That is your subject, your foregrounds, your backgrounds, how you arrange them in your image to tell a story. That's what composition is all about. And what you really want to try to do is create this story that tells the story of your brand in such a way that when a potential client, customer, whatever the case may be, when they see that, they're going to know it comes from, oh, I know that's this brand, that's this company, that's this organization. There are some things that are kind of uniform across the board when we talk about composition. The rule of thirds is something that has been around for probably a century at this point, if I had to guess. Has anybody heard of the rule of thirds or know what that is? A lot of you do, which is good. So I'll give you guys an example of what the rule of thirds is. This is a photo of the Cardinal Greenway, something I did for Destination Muncie. Now, when you see this photo, other than the adorable dogs, this is one thing. There's something specific about this photo that I hope that you take notice of. Where are my subjects in this photo?
Positioned third.
Exactly. Well, first I'll say where they're not. They're not dead center of this picture, right? I'd like to tell you the science behind this, why this is the case. I don't know. But putting your subject dead center in a photo is not as pleasing as moving it somewhere else in the photo. And I'm going to show you exactly where you want to put these things. So here's a grid. This is what the rule of thirds is. You're basically splitting up your image into a 3x3 grid. You want to put your subjects anywhere those lines intersect. If you ever open up your phone in your camera app, there's an option to actually turn on that grid so you can see right there on your camera or in the viewfinder where those lines are intersecting. Where do I have my subjects here? Right up here and right down here. That gives me space to, if you're producing stuff for marketing, that gives you space to put text and other marketing ideas over on the right side. That gives you somewhere to where your eye is being drawn in. The Greenway Trail is drawing my eye this way to my subjects. It's all about leading the viewer where you want them to go. So that's the rule of thirds. Background elements and foreground elements is something else that it's kind of important to pay attention to, and it's easy to miss because it's very easy to say, okay, well, I'm going to take a picture right here on this table. Boom, I'll take a picture and throw it up on Instagram to show off this new mug that we just produced or whatever the case might be. Cool, what's behind it? Did you pay attention to what's behind it? Because maybe there's somebody back there making a weird face that nobody wants to see, or somebody's bent over back there. You don't want to put that out there as well. I mean, there's just a whole host of reasons why you need to pay attention about what's going on behind the image, and also utilize some things in front of the image. So I'm going to show you a couple of images. These are from my friends over at the Caffeinery. Lauren Reber, who's one of the co-owners of the Caffeinery, she is a incredibly talented photographer. She does all of the marketing photos for them. And I wanted to use some of her stuff because I think they really show off composition so incredibly well. You'll pay attention to like this image here. So our subjects are right here, right? And again, center, so this goes against the rule of thirds a little bit, but because there are foreground and background elements working with it, it helps draw that eye back to where it needs to be. She's using these other products back, both behind and in front, to bring your eye back to the center. Same way over here, but in this case, we are using the rule of thirds more. It's come off to the left a little bit. We've got this plant that's kind of come into the foreground, just giving some interest, some visual interest. But what it's also doing is telling you something about the business. It's telling you something about the coffee shop. If you've ever been to the Caffeinery, you know, does this feel like that coffee shop? It does. It feels very much like, hey, if I was sitting in there, this is the same mood that I would get. These are the things that I would see. So that's just a really effective way to try to get across what you want to get across to your customers as far as how they're going to feel when they're in the business itself. Here's another example from my friends over at Toys Forever, Models and Hobbies. So another thing about composition isn't just about where things are positioned in the frame, but it's also about where the camera is positioned. What do you notice about this shot? It's not, remember where I put my cell phone. I'm not taking a picture like this. They've gotten down to the ground and gotten at eye level with what they're taking a photo of. It's not the photographer's eye level that's important here. It's the eye level of the subject. Don't be afraid to get low. Don't be afraid to get high. Shooting things at eye level like this is where everybody's at, right? Taking a picture like this, that's what everybody does. Get interesting with it. Do some different angles. Like I said, you can get low. There's so many times I've seen people take pictures of me doing this, where I'm laid out on the floor. I'm laying flat on the floor, getting a shot because I want something that's got kind of a down angle, just to give it a little bit more interest, something a little bit different that you don't normally see. Taking a picture of this truck from up here, I'm only going to see the top of that truck. I'm not going to see any of this detail down here. I'm not going to see the tread on the tires. I'm not going to see the little license plate here. This truck is probably only about this big. Well, I could have easily set that on a table and probably gotten a similar shot. But we're looking at the environment of the store. We're right in front of the storefront, right in the middle of downtown. There's so much about this photo. I'd like to say I took it. I didn't take it. That tells you about this company. It tells you about this store and this product. And it's all about what they were able to do to make this photo a little bit more interesting. Tip number 4. Know your destination. I'm going to assume, feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, that most of you are putting content out on multiple platforms as far as Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, that sort of stuff. Is that fair to say? Something I'm guessing that you've also noticed is that they all want different sizes of photos. So image dimensions are so important to think about before you take the photo. Before you take the shot, before you even set up the shot, think about where are these pictures going to go? Because that's going to dictate a few choices that you're going to need to make. Is it going to go in an Instagram story? Well, guess what? You're probably going to need to shoot that vertically, right? If you shoot that in a landscape mode, it's going to crop that in such a way that you're going to lose a lot of your shot. Probably going to lose the subject that you're trying to, if you're, again, I'm going to go back to like product photography as an example. You might cut off the coffee mug that you're trying to sell or whatever product it is, and you're not going to really be able to show it at its best, right? If you are looking at something that's going to require a square image, well, that's going to dictate, that rule of thirds. You're not going to be able to shove everything to one side necessarily, at least as far as you would have thought you could. You're going to have to scale things back a little bit in that way. Facebook might be the worst of all of them because there's so many different sizes, so many different dimensions, so many different things that you can use photos for. So cover images are, these long rectangular dimensions like this. Shared images are just as bad. Profile images end up being circles. It's really complicated to remember all this stuff. I wouldn't expect anybody to remember all this stuff. So I did a quick Google search when I was putting this presentation together and found just these two examples of the different sizes that you're going to have in the different social media spaces. I would encourage you to research those for yourself, and because here's the problem, these change. Facebook has changed their image sizes 3 or 4 times just in the last 5 years probably, if I had to guess. It seems like every time I'm trying to post something there, oh, well, nope, this has changed. I'm going to have to completely redo things. One of the things that I do when I'm taking photos that I know are going to go up on social media that maybe I don't know where all they are going to go, I take multiple versions. I'll take a horizontal version. I'll take a vertical version. I'll take one that's farther back. I'll take one that's a little bit closer up. That way I've got options when I go to post something and I say, that crop's really weird and that's cutting off all the things that I don't want to have cut off. I can go back to another version, throw it up there and try to get it to where I want it to be so that what I'm trying to convey in that image can be conveyed in a way that is what is good for the business. LinkedIn has its own dimensions. Twitter or X has its own dimensions. TikTok is essentially the vertical stories version of Instagram, I think. Again, research these. Before you take your photo, research those, know what you're going to do with it so that you can prepare as you're trying to compose that image. Tip number 5. To zoom or not to zoom, that is the question. When cell phones became kind of the most popular camera on the market, well, actually, I'm going to take you a little bit farther back than that. I'm going to go back to the first iPhone. I remember standing in line for the first iPhone for 20 hours outside of an AT&T store, a Singular store at the time. And I remember the coolest thing that I could do with that. I could pinch and zoom. This is the coolest thing ever, right? Well, it's cool until you look at the photos that you've taken after you've maxed out that zoom range because, well, who wants to get closer to that, to whatever it is I'm shooting? I'm sure, how many of you guys have done that before? Everybody's done. Yeah, I know. One of the things you're going to notice, and I'm sure you have, or at least I hope you have, is how distorted that photo gets after you do that, right? I cannot emphasize this enough. This is almost as much as cleaning off your lens, is to resist using that digital zoom. And I'll tell you why you can resist it, and if it makes you feel better. You can do the exact same thing as that pinch to zoom after you've taken the photo. You'll get the exact same result. If you take that photo and crop it down in Photoshop or whatever your photo editing app you want, you'll get the exact same thing. You don't have to do it in there. Here's the difference, is if you zoom in the camera with that digital zoom, you'll never get that information back. If you take that shot as wide as it was without zooming, go in and crop it down, you'll get the exact same thing, but maybe you'll find that, hey, you know what, that actually looks a lot better if I don't crop it in that far. But we have some options. I'll go back to my wonderful Yashica twin lens reflex. So this is a shot that was taken just with no zoom whatsoever. I'll show you the difference of what this will look like. This was taken after I've zoomed in the camera. Do you see the difference in just the degradation of that image? Between that and that. The only difference here was how much zoom I was using in camera. We've lost detail. We've lost dynamic range, which is the amount of light to shadow. It has, honestly, ignoring the fact that the background looks ugly, but that's a shot I could never use for marketing. Or at least I would encourage people not to use for marketing. Because, again, that photography is the first thing that your customer will see in your social media accounts. It's the first impression that they get. Here's the side-by-side. And again, there wasn't anything done to these images to alter them. This isn't, I blurred it up to emphasize it more. This is straight out of the camera. That's the difference between using a digital zoom and optical zoom. And that's one of the great things in modern cell phones, is you can actually have an optical zoom. So the difference between a digital and optical, I guess I should probably say that real fast. Optical zoom is this. So we have a lens that actually moves or has a different focal length than what a smaller focal length would be. Digital zoom is where you're simply cropping into the pixels. You're just making those pixels bigger and degrading the quality of the image. So a lot of phones now have like multiple lenses on them. So I've got a wide, a normal, and a telephoto, I think is what the three ways they describe them. So the optical zoom was actually taken with the telephoto lens on my camera, right? Something like that is totally fine because it's designed for that purpose. You're not blowing up pixels. You're actually using a different sensor that's all kind of made to work in that regard. So resisting that digital zoom is going to step up that game quite a bit. So again, optical zoom is okay. There's one other thing that you can do, however. If you're like, well, I don't have the telephoto lens, I've only got the one lens, for example, or something still isn't working right. Don't be afraid to get close. In the photography world, there has always been this, thank you, Dylan. There has always been this kind of, this thing that people would say, and it had to do with folks that would shoot with prime lenses. Prime lenses are lenses essentially that just don't zoom, is you zoom with your feet. And you do exactly what Dylan just did. You take the camera and instead of sitting back here and saying, okay, well, that's good enough. Well, no, I'll get closer and get a shot there. Goes back to composition, right? Doing things that maybe your typical when you're just out getting snapshots of your family on the weekend, what you would do. This is something you think a little bit differently, and you get some different shots and you get some different angles to make your photography a little bit more interesting. So getting close is a way to do that, as well as getting farther back, showing your environment. So I've got a couple of examples to show you. I'm going to go back to my friends over at the caffeinery. She pulled back to show off the environment, to show off, look, we've got all these windows, we've got this seating space, we've got plants, showing off what it looks like if you were to come in and have a coffee and sit down. This is what this is going to look like. This is the environment you're going to be walking into. And also get close, show off the details, get close and show off the workmanship of the products that you're trying to sell, or the food that you just want to eat. So don't be afraid to get into situations with your camera that you wouldn't normally do. Look, it's going to be trial and error. You may find that, okay, well, that didn't work. I can't tell you how many times that happens to me today, where I'll take a shot. I'll be like, yeah, that didn't work. Thought it was going to work, didn't work. And I go back and try something else. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a trial and error process, and eventually you're going to find yourself falling into a style, and it's going to match that brand that you're trying to convey to your audience. All right. And I think that's it. Have fun, get creative, and build your brand. Those are the most important things you can do with your photography when it comes to marketing. Just have fun. That's the biggest thing that I can convey to you, is have fun with it. Don't overthink. Just try some new things and see what happens. All right. There you go.
Thank you, Matt. This is the moment where, hey,